Welcome to Wealthion. I'm Wealthion founder Adam Taggart. We sit down now with James Rickards himself. Jim, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Adam. It's great to be with you.
Thanks. What's your current assessment of the global economy and financial markets?
I look for a severe recession in the U.S., really global, because your question was how's the global outlook? It's pretty bad. Maybe something closer to social unrest and riots in Europe, and then on top of that, possibly a global financial liquidity crisis worse than 2008.
What's responsible for us only having 62% of our working age population actually engaged in working?
The Fed looks at unemployment. I mean, I look at it because you're supposed to know what it is. I mean, I always say, if you're trying to forecast the Fed, you got to look at the world the way they do, even if it's messed up. Like even if they're looking at the wrong things, which they are. As an analyst, you have to look at them to figure out what they're doing. That's how you do intelligence work. Think like the other guy. But then once I take my Fed hat off and say, well, what do I think? The unemployment rate's almost irrelevant. First, that's a lagging indicator. Secondly, it ignores what we talked about with labor force participation. There is no Phillips curve. I mean, you can draw one. Last time I saw Phillips curve was flat. Or I went to school, curves weren't flat. But but they're just looking at the wrong indicators.
Do you think is basically a painful recession going to be what sort of cures it, which is it evaporates the excess job openings. The people on the couch finally just run out of means as long as there's still no government checks going to them. And eventually they have to say, hey, if I want to afford Doritos, I got to go get a job.
I don't know if what the recession is a cure for. It's coming. I mean, the recession is coming. And Jay Powell said this. I mean, Jay Powell gave two speeches, August 26th at Jackson Hole and September 21st after a press conference after the FOMC meeting that day. Inflation was job one. They also think the recession, if it comes, will be mild, but those two things together will get inflation under control.
Right. And by the way, they think the mild because they think they're going to engineer a soft landing, which I'm guessing you think the probability of a soft landing is pretty low.
Close to zero. Okay. They want to get core PCE year over year to 2%. It just came in at 5.2, which was up from August. The September was 5.2. August was about 4.7, give or take. It just went up. I mean, it's not going down. But they're trying to get it down. Now Powell did not say we're going to raise rates until core PC is 2%. He didn't say that. What he said was we're going to raise rates until it's acting in a restrictive way on inflation, and inflation will come down on its own because rates will be high enough to cause that. Mm-hmm. At which point we the Fed will pause. And you say, well, when are you going to cut rates? He was like, the pause could be a year.
Right.
So you're talking, forget this Fed pivot nonsense. I mean, you're talking 2024, if then, before they cut rates. They probably will have achieved the goal of bringing core PCE down, but they will also have destroyed the economy in the process. It's like I remember in Vietnam, the old saying, we had to destroy the village to save it. We have to destroy the economy to save it. This is the latest in a long string of Fed blunders since 1913. Seems to be their specialty, but that's what they're doing.
Right now, is there really much different the Fed could be doing?
Yeah, they could at least pause now, or maybe even cut rates. If everything I said is correct, and obviously I think it is, or I wouldn't be saying it, but if we're on the verge of a global liquidity crisis, as revealed by the Eurodollar futures curve and the Treasury yield curve, and negative swap spreads and Treasury bill auctions with the yield to maturity below what the Fed will give you for a phone call. I mean, all those things are happening. That's hard data. And it's a very, very troubling sign, last seen in 2008, by the way, before the Lehman Brothers meltdown. If all that's happening and the fundamental signs are also weak, which we just saw in third quarter GDP, which is based on net exports, which won't last. How are you going to drive a trade surplus with the strongest dollar in 20 years? Good luck with that. I mean, nobody can afford our stuff, and we're not buying anybody else's stuff. So with the economy going into a recession on its own, with a global liquidity crisis brewing, why on earth is the Fed raising rates at all?
Okay. And so does that imply then, if we just sort of let the system take care of itself, that CPI would get pulled down anyways by this recession?
That because everyone says, well, yeah, COVID messed it up and the war in Ukraine messed it up. Well, that's true, but it didn't start there. This started in 2018 with Trump's tariffs. Because I'm not here to debate the tariffs. I actually think the tariffs were a good idea, but that was the start of the supply chain breakdown. So the point being, you completely scrambled all these supply chain relationship, and they break down. That it's not that it's the end of the supply chain. So there's nothing new about supply chains. We can document to the Bronze Age. What was new, beginning around 1989, was supply chain science. The combination of vastly improved computing power, artificial intelligence, new algorithms, and more sources of data that could be put together and used by experts to optimize and make the supply chains more efficient. That was new. And it kind of began with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And, Berlin Wall fell in 1989. Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. I talked to the guy who, this is a worldwide endeavor, but he was probably the single most responsible individual for all the significant developments in the supply chain in the last 30 years. And he said to me, he said, Jim, you have to understand, it took us 30 years to build it. We blew it up in 3 years. It's not going to come back overnight. It's going to take 10 years or more to rebuild it.